and we are here live.
That's the truth.
Yes.
Good to see you, John.
Likewise, I'm here in New York for the weekend for a special meeting I've got with our own Sangha tomorrow.
That's great.
Yeah. And then off on retreat for 2.5 weeks, I think. Yeah. So
nice.
How are you doing?
Doing all right. Yeah, it's cold here. I think it's cold in New York too.
Cold here, yeah, but it was colder in Chicago 2 days ago.
That's
so
probably
it's
true.
downright balmy here. Yeah.
Yeah. Compared to Chicago, you don't have the wind, right? I mean, windy city
in New York. Yeah, but it's not called the Windy City because of the wind. I was told.
Oh, really?
Anyway.
Why is it called that then?
The windbag politicians.
Ah, that's right. But it is also windy. So yeah.
Very, yeah. So anyway. So today's topic, I
teachers.
think is going to be teachers, and that leads me into sort of teacher training kind of things, and which I just completed a bunch of a training with a new MBSR teachers, which is one way of teaching, but how we relate to teachers, how do we find a teacher even, and it's always
you teach teachers. You should probably explain that. You teach teachers.
I teach teachers for mindfulness-based stress reduction. I train new teachers. And that's a very specific curriculum, but it also requires very specific skills which relate to any kind of teaching of I think of meditation and mindfulness. And Dharma, hold on, I just hit the wrong thing on my earphone. Because I think what's challenging about finding a teacher is finding it. I mean, so there's one thing to go on retreat and be with the teacher for an extended period, whether it's a week or a month. And in those cases, when it's on retreat, one quality that is really important in a teacher, for me anyway, is how the teacher can hold the group as a group and hold a container, which is also a big part of teaching MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, because you're dealing with a group of, quite a diverse group of people many of whom have never meditated before, many of whom have never, considered experiencing life in a different way. And, stuff will come up, of course. And in an MBSR class, there's what we call inquiry, which involves kind of helping each participant, when they have something that comes up, find their own answer to the, which, in other words, we don't emote facts per se, except in certain cases. I mean, when we're talking about, the physiology of stress, and even then, it's a question of anybody who's in the class, our job, as I see it, is to help them find their own answer, not to give them an answer, right? Because the moment you find your own answer, then it's really yours, and you take it in much more fully than if I just, fill your glass with facts. That doesn't really help. Per se.
Well, I mean, it's a different approach. My approach, as you know, is more of the academic one, which is, and some teachers, like Andy Alinsky teaches a little bit more like that as well, I think, to an extent.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
where it's
there's scholar teachers.
Exactly. Yeah. Where we're, or even Analio at times. I mean, that's sort of just depending on how, what kind of issues he's talking about. And so they're different, they're really different, and they're both, I think they're both really important. And I remember, because I grew up going in an academic environment, and that's all I knew really about what it was to be a teacher. And then when I sat in on your courses at the beginning, I was like, wow, okay, there's a really different way of doing this. It's one that I personally am not comfortable with for
Sure.
myself
No,
because
yeah.
I'm just not used to it. But it's not that it's wrong. It's just it's a great way of doing it. It's just different.
It's two different things. Two
Mhm.
different in a way. It's yeah, I mean, it's one thing if we're taking in the well, I mean, let's if we just think of the way the Buddha taught.
Mm,
I mean, it's apparently, right? So, there are thousands of suttas, right? And he was teaching in a way, each person individually based on who they were. He obviously had an ability to kind of really see somebody almost immediately and direct a teaching toward who that person was. And, who knows how it was when he was teaching 1,000 monks, or he was giving a talk to 1,000 monks. That's giving a talk is one thing. Working with each individual student in terms of meditation, in terms of what their obstacles are, what their challenges are, everybody is different. And so that's very different than teaching as you do, really interesting information about a particular teaching and a particular part of practice. And of course, most of your teaching is not one-to-one or even
right.
one with a live group in front of you. So it's a very different experience. And even Andy and I mean, I've you have people like Analio who are incredible scholars and also very serious practitioners.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm actually going on a retreat this coming week with a Chan teacher,
Mm.
Guo Gu, who's a major academic. He's a scholar at Florida State University in later traditions. But he's also a really great meditation and Dharma teacher in a retreat setting. And he has this vast encyclopedic, similar to Analio, knowledge of certain Mahayana suttas, as well as the earlier suttas. There's a very different, at least, I mean, we'll see I've never been in a longer, this is a 7-day retreat as opposed to the weekend I spent with him in the summer. I don't know how much, well, it'll just be interesting to see how he is in that kind of setting. And so, many teachers and the monks that I've been in on retreat with, Ajahn Suchito primarily, they have a pretty encyclopedic knowledge of the teachings as well, but they're not approaching it necessarily from the scholarly space that somebody like Analio would be.
Hmm.
But still, it's there, and their teaching embodies all of that. And to me, that's what's really important in a teacher, is how they embody the teachings themselves. And my first major teacher was a man named Matthew Flickstein, who's still going strong. He must be he's 10 years older than me, so he's in his early 80s. I haven't spoken with him for quite some time. Matt, if you're listening, greetings. But I would be surprised. But who knows? And his teacher was Bhante Gunaratana, who was also a scholar.
Still going.
But yeah, almost 100.
Yeah, crazy.
Maybe he is now. And he also had an encyclopedic knowledge of the early teachings, but he never taught from that in that way. He wouldn't, he could call up any sutta because he had a photographic memory, but still, and of course in Pali, and but there was still something about him that was just so, there's a warmth about him and a kind of sweetness about him that, of somebody who's been practicing, some monks since they were basically 14, and now he's almost 100. Again, I haven't been with him for almost 20 years, but he was just actually on Clear Mountain Monastery, just did an interview with him, which was really fun. And so, so in terms of finding a teacher, I think I lucked out in a way because I was managing a retreat for New York Insight that Matt was leading. And it was one of their rare residential retreats back in the early aughts. And so I got to know him a bit, and then I led a second retreat with him and got to know him. And then, he invited me to join one of his trainings, and then we worked together. I don't know, I worked with him for 8 years, through a lot of different teachings. And that was fortunate. I was really lucky because there was a small group of us that would meet 3 times a year, and then we would individually talk to Matt once a month. And those kind of that, there are some teachers who are so popular, they obviously couldn't do it to that extent. Maybe with a few people that they'd work individually, and so, if you belong to a center, or if you go on a retreat and you really relate to somebody closely and feel like this is a person you would want to work more deeply with, then reach out and see what happens. And sometimes they can do it and sometimes they can't. I mean, but it is important, I think, to find someone if you can, or at least attend one teacher, attend as many events with one teacher as you can to sort of really get a sense of what that person can offer.
I'm just one thing I was wondering from your experience, because you've done both MBSR itself, that is to say, with the public, and teaching the teachers of MBSR. And what is the difference between, how do you, is there a difference? How does the difference manifest in teaching teachers rather than teaching, I'm sure it must be quite different. But that's something I've never experienced. So.
So hopefully any teacher, and the people that come to MBSR teacher training, there are certain prerequisites, but some people will come with a lot of actually already having a lot of teaching experience in one form or another. To me, one of the most important qualities, particularly in MBSR teachers, is a level of humility. That means that, we never stop learning. We're always learning, and we learn from our peers. We learn from our, people with more experience. We learn from our students, and you're just kind of always. It's not like I become a teacher and that's it, right? It's just like you're always becoming and taking something in. And the reason I love teaching new MBSR teachers is because it makes me a much better teacher. Because you're being pushed all the time, and having to really look at what I do as a teacher in that particular curriculum, but even as a Dharma teacher, that might help somebody else realize sort of what, how to get past whatever their obstacles are or were. And as you know, when in the classes that you took with me, and I think we've even talked about it somewhat here, when I had when I was living in New York and was teaching on a regular basis at New York Insight, I would continually offer classes very often on a teaching that I had never actually looked at myself.
That's right.
Deeply,
Yeah.
And I did it specifically so I could really dive in and then, explore it together with the people in the class. And that was great. And I'm going to start doing that more online and in Chicago. But it's and there's something, so it's just I see it as a continual process. And I think, I've never, other than the MBSR teachers, the senior MBSR teachers, I know even Jon Kabat-Zinn, he's always looking and studying and talking to other teachers and gaining from that insights from them. And I'm sure that's true with, the major insight teachers like Joseph Goldstein and all these, Tara. It's like we don't stop. We never stop, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that's true of every kind of teacher. It's certainly even in academia.
Should
a yeah, it should be. I mean, a good
Yeah.
academic teacher should always be open to learning new whatever,
Right.
that they're always, if a student or a colleague brings something new to them, that's great. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's I mean, it's really fun now that I have this community that's slowly growing at the University of Chicago. These students who are so, they're really into the academic world.
Yeah, I would think so.
It's and
Yeah.
it's like
Chicago, sure.
not necessarily in my sangha, but in one of the other sanghas I'd sit with sometimes. There are like 4 or 5 different groups at the university. And you'll get these kids who've like been studying, say, the Heart Sutra, or one of the other Mahayana teachings primarily, and they'll bring all this kind of intellectual thinking into it, and it's like, and then, well, how do you actually practice that? It's like, it's one thing to conceptually understand, and it's another thing to experientially understand, and it's a whole other thing to embody the teaching. And it's like, when I find myself as a teacher, if I find myself like just handing facts over, that's because I don't know what the hell I'm talking about, or I haven't experienced anything myself, and I just have to stop, because that's not how I teach, and I need to kind of really know the experience of impermanence, or obvious. That's a little easy, know the experience of emptiness, sort of having, because you can talk about it until you're blue in the face, but that doesn't necessarily impart anything,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I mean, from my way of teaching, it's, I don't want to say something unless I have some evidence from the texts or from somewhere that it's correct. Right. And that's another way of saying, if I don't know it, I prefer not to, I can give you an opinion, but it's a sort of a meaningless opinion because I don't have any evidence. But
hopefully, on much of what you teach, though, Doug, you have your own evidence.
That's true. That is absolutely true. But there's, of course, a lot of stuff that I talk about, which is well beyond my own experience, such as if I talk about nirvana, or, what does nirvana mean in early Buddhism? What does enlightenment mean in early Buddhism? These kinds of things. How do we understand the higher realms of meditative absorption? And a lot of that I've learned, frankly, from teachers like Bhikkhu Bodhi, who is extremely good scholar and knows the stuff very well, and who I've also studied with quite a bit. And so I'm sort of going on their interpretations and interpretations of other people. So I mean, I think there's a lot. I don't want to go beyond what I can say from the information that I have. But it's true that you can, I mean, I think I, as well as, a lot of people that I'm familiar with, I mean, we just find it fascinating. The early stuff is very, very intellectually, or all of Buddhism is very intellectually rich. There's so much going on there that you sort of can get, I mean, and, you just geek out on it, I mean, what happens. And, a little bit of that is not a problem. The problem is if you obviously if it's only intellectual, the way it is with with some professors, let's say, of Buddhist studies, who really only interact with it intellectually, which is fine. I mean, like Richard Gombrich, for example, is my understanding. Now, I don't know him personally, but my understanding is that Richard Gombrich didn't really practice Buddhism, at least not very assiduously, although he knew the texts extremely well and was one of the great scholars. And that can be helpful to other people, but is not going to be very helpful to the person themselves, I think.
Well, I mean, in the academic world, though, there was always this kind of, until recently, I think even, that there was almost this unwritten policy that you didn't
practice.
You didn't practice what you were. Yeah, I mean, or you
Yeah.
weren't. You weren't in. You weren't a religious practitioner, to whatever. I mean, whatever your religion was, when you
Right.
were a scholar on those things.
Right.
At least in university settings,
Right.
and that's changing, I think.
Yeah, it is. I mean, to an extent, it's, there's always been some movement there, but I mean, the thing in academia is that you want somebody who is ideally as objective as possible. Now, it's impossible to be perfectly objective, of course, we all know that, but the point is you want somebody with an open mind. And
Yeah.
the concern a lot of academics have with, let's say, practitioners in quotes, is that a lot of them, or some of them, don't have an open mind. They've closed their mind. They've decided this is the correct way of practicing.
Yeah.
This is the correct religion. This is the correct interpretation. This is the one that I have faith in.
Yeah.
And
That's the problem.
therefore I'm not going to take any other one seriously. And this does happen, even with some academic practitioners, followers, whatever. I mean, I'm thinking of Christian ones in particular, and I'm sure there's some Buddhist ones as well. I mean, I'm sure it happens in every religion, where it's sort of like, the Catholic interpretation of the Bible is the correct one because I'm a Catholic, and or the Mahayana interpretation of the Dharma is the correct one because I am a Pure Land, or whatever. I mean, whatever it happens to be.
Sure, absolutely, yeah.
And that's the problem from an academic point of view, is to say,
understandably,
I mean, you want somebody ideally with as open a mind as possible, so that they can see all of the different interpretations and understand them from their own perspective, and not get too, narrow in your willingness to accept an interpretation. So that's
there is that Buddhist teaching, right? Don't hold to fixed views.
Well, exactly. And so you can even say it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's this kind of that's the wonderful sort of Zen paradox of Buddhist, philosophy or Buddhist interpretation, is, that the interpretation itself is, a question.
Yeah. And I mean, but that's what makes it fun too. And of course, I mean, from what when you look at the Talmud in Judaism, it's all commentary on commentary, and same is true in most, because there's always this questioning in spiritual practice and religious practice, like, wait a minute, what is this? What, and without that questioning, I mean, the questioning is really important. I think that the doubt is it's great doubt is so important in terms of, like, we and as the Buddha said, don't believe me, just try it.
Yeah.
Don't take my word for it. Go and see for yourself. And providing, and so I think, I mean, I think what's important, and I'm still learning, especially in the Dharma realm of teaching, it's like I can only teach from my own experience. I can only teach, what I've experienced, and if I try to teach otherwise, it usually falls flat. And I think
you can say that so-and-so teaches it this way. I mean, you can be honest without,
for sure,
without claiming that you yourself know that,
Absolutely, yeah. And when it comes to jhana practice, I can't really speak other than the experience of samadhi, and even then, it's like, okay, how do you, because some of these things you can't really describe. I mean, they are described, but it's like, it's hard to talk about. So, but just back to, I mean, everybody, what makes a good teacher? What makes a good teacher is a teacher who you can relate to, and and feel comfortable with, and
But there has
who,
to be something on their side as well. I mean, because people can get comfortable with teachers and then find out that they were severely mistaken.
yeah,
So there's
sure,
also, there has to be an element of integrity on the part of the teacher, which not often, but at least at times, is not immediately apparent.
yeah,
You have to live, as the Buddha himself said, you have to live with somebody for a while before you really know, what they're
yeah,
like.
yeah, and certainly there are um, dilettantes absolutely out there, and uh, I think that's why I think where the humility is so important. If it, if a teacher is challenged by a student and can't sort of really look at what he or she is saying in that, how are they working with being challenged? How are they
Mhm.
holding it? And and to me, that's part of the embodiment of practice is, if I'm challenged by something that comes up in a class, do I get defensive, or do I sort of like, hmm, take a moment to see what's really happening here, and then respond from that space,
Mhm.
as opposed to like, and that to me is like a key ingredient in a teacher's own practice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and if it's always like a quick reaction, a quick response to something, then I would question that, whether that's the right teacher for me.
Well, I mean, of course, somebody like an Analio probably does have a pretty quick answer because he
He
knows
does,
the
he
stuff so
does, he
deeply.
does. He knows
But
that,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
but
But
you're
he's
right.
also,
It's something as knowing it, and something as the emotional ability to. Well, I mean, what you're saying with not being defensive. I mean, like the Buddha says, of not clinging to the. Everyone has views, but to not cling to them, and so not be defensive when you're challenged. That's a
yeah.
hard one, but yeah, it's absolutely critical.
And it's one thing if you're being challenged on what the sutta literally what
Right,
the sutta
right,
says,
right,
then you can say, well, no, it actually says this. How
right,
you work with it,
right.
and and sure, I mean, I've only been with Anelio in one of his retreats and one of his classes, um, and when he is repeating a sutta or speaking about a specific teaching, I trust that, and I'm not going to question that. But if it comes to how it falls into one's practice, and how
Mm,
it falls into one's life, and how one lives that teaching, that's a
right.
whole other thing.
Yeah.
And the Buddha wasn't giving these teachings as the Buddha wasn't teaching from an academic place at all.
Right.
Right, and so that's what we have to remember. So it's like, he was giving the teachings, and then they were being remembered as he gave them, presumably, and then how we work with them individually is dependent on who we are at any given moment. And hopefully, if we've found a teacher that can help us understand from our own experience, what is actually happening,
Yeah.
that's important. And
Critical.
yeah, and so it's interesting. It's important to find someone as best you can, and you know, and then work with a person for a while and see how it feels, and that's all you can do.
Hmm.
I don't want to say it's like finding a therapist, because we're not therapists at all.
Right.
Well, I shouldn't say that. Many are, but hopefully they're not teaching from a therapeutic place, unless that's what you want.
Right.
You know, and yeah, and to me, when it comes to teaching, a Dharma teacher and meditation teacher and a mindfulness teacher, it's like, how are they living the practice?
Yeah.
And then how do they impart what they're, how do they teach from that place? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that as we said before, the teachings are so intellectually interesting that get us curious, and they get us the mind spinning, and it's great. We geek out on it, but at the end of the day, the as the Buddha says, the point of the teaching is to is the third noble truth is to end suffering, and the only way to do that is to put the teaching to practice.
Right.
So, but yeah, absolutely, we need it. I mean, teachers are essential to that. If we don't necessarily need to find one, although that can be helpful.
No.
But sometimes having, at least in the Theravada tradition, having several teachers is good. In other traditions, it is important to find your one teacher. So it sort of depends what kind of Buddhism you relate to, what kind of practice you relate to. But yeah.
So friends, good luck.
Yeah, good luck.
And
share that cup of coffee with your teacher, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm, this friend that I'm staying with has a really good coffee maker.
Oh, good.
And it's one of those like automated things where you just choose. Yeah.
Oh, wow. All right.
And you hear all this thing happening and grinds the coffee, and then it's like, wow. It takes the sort of it takes the mindfulness practice out of making the coffee, though. It's just like just do it yourself. So anyway, we say all that so you can help support the program and buy us a cup of coffee through diggingthedharma.com.
Diggingthedharma.com. I'll put the banner up here on the screen for people watching. If you're watching, then you can on YouTube.
And I will be away, so we will have one more end of year podcast, and then we'll begin the new year and see where we go.
Exactly.
All right, friends.
Great talking with you, John. Yep.
Likewise.
Keep digging the Dharma.